In the name of God, whose welcome redefines inclusivity. Amen. Welcome and hospitality form a thread that runs through both Hebrew and Christian scriptures. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines welcome as a kindly greeting or reception as to one whose arrival gives pleasure. Within the context of Scripture, the teachings take on a deeper, more proactive, and expansive meaning. In today's gospel reading, Jesus tells us that welcoming a person is the equivalent of welcoming the divine. That sets a pretty high bar. We are more likely to adjust our level of hospitality to our fondness for the visitor. Honoré J.M. Nouwen, in his book Reaching Out, The Three Movements of the Spiritual Life, says, hospitality means primarily the creation of free space where the stranger can enter and become a friend instead of an enemy. Hospitality is not to change people, but to offer them a space where change can take place. It's not to bring a person over to our side, but to offer freedom, not disturbed by dividing lines. He goes on to lay out a clear path for understanding that our responsibility to welcome must be without preconceived ideas as to how it will turn out. Jesus goes on to suggest that our inclusive welcome will not always be met with approval from our family, friends, and neighbors. Today's reading is the tag end of last week's gospel, where Jesus told us that actions on behalf of God's kingdom often divide families. In these verses, he tells us that a prophet's reward is often rejection, even persecution. Jesus warns us that living out kingdom values in a secular world will not always be peaceful. He tells us that those closest to us might be the ones most disturbed by our inclusive love and our willingness to share our resources in the pursuit of creating a just society. The life of faith is not a back door to escape the complications of life. The experience of faith can help us develop the musculature to respond to difficulty. We are called to act as proxies of the divine without regard to the outcome. The early 20th century philosopher G.K. Chesterton said, "The Christian faith has not been tried and found wanting. It has been found difficult and left untried." Jesus had an intuitive way of calling out institutions of injustice without closing the door of welcome to those who operated within the walls of the oppressor. Our acrimonious social media promotes division without healthy dialogue, resulting in blocking and boycotting. Sustained anger and rage have become the mainstay of our discourse, and soon, as Gandhi said, an eye for an eye, and soon the whole world goes blind. Our responsibility to discern the behaviors of our culture and the resulting implications for those on the margins is a never-ending call for those who take what it means to follow Jesus seriously. But to paraphrase Jesus, social injustice will always be with us. An imperfect metaphor that comes to my mind is forest fires. They will always be with us, but we understand the need for diligence. We know that ignoring them would bring about disaster. I read an unsourced quote this week, which I resonated. There are two kinds of insufferable people in the world. Those who can't see the pain of the world and refuse to do anything about it, and those who can see nothing else. Balance is the key. There's a time to work your ever-loving butt off and a time to play dead. If you don't get the two in the right proportions, you will either end up a burned-out workaholic or a socially irresponsible slob. This was followed by a quote from the book of Proverbs. "A merry heart doeth good like medicine, but a broken spirit drieth the bones. You were not created for anger. You were created for joy. Anger has a healthy purpose, but it's an unhealthy lifestyle. Sustained rage is rarely productive. It burns everything in its path and often ends in exhaustion, disillusionment, and finally apathy. The work of social justice is to participate in the slow work of God. This is a paradox of urgency and patience. So how do we manage our lives in the midst of such social injustice? Feelings of anger and injustice can keep you focused on what's wrong and who's to blame. So remind yourself that focusing on it gives it more energy. Choose to be empowered by separating the facts of the situation from your emotions. Discovering the intersection of your gifts and the world's needs can give you purpose-filled energy for a very specific benefit. But don't take the results of your work personally. There are times when no good deed goes unpunished. Times of great social stress require attention to self-care. When the going got tough, Jesus retreated to a place of quiet and restoration. Don't neglect your life and your relationships. These nurture you and give you strength. Don't succumb to guilt over having a good life. Remember that Jesus was often criticized for his active social activities. Practice gratitude for the goodness in your life and in the world, and let that swell into a wave of generosity toward those that are so deeply engraved on your heart. Welcoming is an act of balance. This inclusive spiritual practice opens the door to dialogue, relationships, forgiveness, and healing. Welcome is an act of social justice. Amen.